Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Grandmaster Plan podcast, your premier podcast for high-level Gwent strategy, analysis, and general talk. So today I am joined by my two co-hosts, ShoePlays. What's going on, dude?
What's up, Joe? Nice to be here again.
Always a pleasure. And Truedawn, what's going on, brother?
Hey, I'm pretty good. Hope you guys have been doing well as well.
Sweet. So we do have some special new stuff we'd like to try out today on the podcast. Let's just kick it off with a little round the table though. ShoePlays, what have you been doing Gwent related lately? Has Gwent been treating you?
It's been pretty good. I mean, I've been watching a fair amount of streams. A lot of people playing the new arena and things like that. I personally haven't had too much time to play, just because I've been busy with real life stuff. But yeah, it's been fine. I think I'm just in the patch waiting room, spice a little things up. How about you guys?
What about you, Truedawn?
I've played ranked a little bit at the beginning of the season. It was actually I was having enjoying it enough to the point where I actually ground out number 1, and then I just stopped enjoying it, so I didn't do that anymore. But yeah, I've been playing it on and off, checking things out that interest me, and then getting dumpstered by egregious things, and then doing other stuff. So.
It feels like a really slow week in Gwent news, nothing really going on, nothing exciting, which is kind of why we're...
kind of feels like that as well, right? That's I don't know, that's why I haven't personally been enjoying ranked too much. Not that, I mean, everything's kind of balanced, but I feel like I've played this season already, so I just don't have a large reason to play a lot of ranked. I've been pretty much just jamming the arena, having fun, going for memes.
I think that's what a lot of people have been doing. Because, I mean, in ranked, yeah, we got those 10 new cards, but half of them are, arena filler trash, and then the other half are good, but they're gold cards, so not, changing decks fundamentally or anything. So I think, Joe, what you're saying is kind of spot on for a lot of people, just maybe a little burnout of ranked, kind of the same meta. Not that the meta is bad, per se, but it's just the same as last month, and arena is something kind of fresh and new. What do you guys think about that? Have you guys been liking arena so far?
I've been having a blast. Absolute blast, man.
That's great. I'm not target audience. I don't like limited, so I don't really do that. But if people are deriving enjoyment from it when they previously did not, that's awesome. It's good for the rest of the game.
Yeah, it's just fun to me, man. I understand that it's not the highest skill cap format of all time, and I'm well aware of its flaws, but damn, is it a lot of fun just having so many different sweet interactions, and I don't know, I had one really cool highlight this week where I top-decked a runestone, and I hit Wakim into Burza, into another runestone, into another Wakim, and shit just went crazy. I mean, it's just a lot of fun, man. You have to realize sometimes your opponent's gonna just play Shoop or some 60-point nonsense train of events, but I've been having a lot of fun with it, man. It's enjoyable.
Yeah, I think it's definitely good introduction to the game. I mean, people have been thirsting for a new game mode, something different for a while now, so I'm glad that they're finally doing it. But like we said, ladies and gents, it has been kind of a slow news week for Gwent, so we're going to transition over to some interesting segments that we're going to try out. Right now we're going to hop into our play analysis. That will be kind of what's the play, and it's something new that we want to do. Kind of take tournament games or maybe some famous streamer or something they have a play, and give you guys kind of a snapshot of the game and say what would we do in their position. What are the lines, what do we think is best given the information that we have, and we'd like to go ahead and get into that right now. So hopefully you guys will enjoy and let us know how it turns out. But we're going to be doing Wild Hunt Edition. It's kind of the big tournament that we've had recently. A lot of great games and plays in Wild Hunt. So without further ado, we'll jump right into the first play. This is Dr. Gur versus Amonomarth in the quarterfinals. And we have kind of an interesting mulligan decision here. Joe, why don't you kick it off and tell people what's going on in this?
Okay, so basically what's going on in this situation is Dr. Gur is, a non-Siri Nova version of Dagon. We're moving into round 3, and we're looking at Amon Amarth specifically, and his decision to mulligan here. Amon Amarth, just to give you guys some background information that's necessary for the discussion of this play, is playing a Hubert-based 40-card style and R deck, which means that the Alzur's Double Cross that you see in his hand is going to be able to target the Hubert at will and make one gigantic play. Now, the crux of this play is, should he keep the Bloody Baron in his hand and sort of diversify his threats, or should he mulligan away the Bloody Baron for another card that's in his deck, pulling the Hubert, which would then also suck the green strength off of the Bloody Baron. So what is the proper play and why? And we're going to sort of talk you through the different lines of thought and why you would make one play or another.
Yeah, this one of the important thing about this as well is that you're card down with 6 points of carryover on the opposing sides. You're already a dog to win the round. You need
Correct.
to get as much upside as possible. So if you think that this combination of cards gives you the most points, keep it. If you think that there are other available options in your deck, like for mulliganing, that increase your total point value, even if they are unlikely, you probably need to go for it because you are so far behind right now. Even if your opponent has like 3 average cards, which pretend we don't see the monster's hand right now, you're going to be about even, and if they have like 1 above average one, you're probably going to lose anyway. So this is a spot where I think you pretty clearly have to mulligan for upside, that being getting rid of the Bloody Baron so the boost goes to the Hubert and hoping to hit one of your other good cards remaining in the deck.
And to Truedawn's point as well, please, for the sake of this argument, try and blur out Dr. Gur's hand here. Because if you're in Amon Amarth's position, all you know about the situation is your hand and the cards your opponent has already played. Now, we do know that his opponent has not played a Scorch, Shiru, or what's the most likely punish for one large play in this type of scenario, in a Mandrake, particularly off of a Tribute or something. So one of the other factors you want to think about here is, if my opponent has a card like that, is that something I even have the potential to beat? Can I beat that even if I quote-unquote play around it? Is it worth it to quote-unquote play around it, or do I just have to jam for maximal amount of points here? What's your initial analysis of this shoe?
So just for everyone joining us here from Swim's channel, we're just doing a little play analysis here, kind of what's the play. This is the Wild Hunt edition, so we're taking certain plays in that tournament and going through the lines and seeing what's optimal. Important to note here is that although Amon Amarth doesn't have all the information, this is game 3, right? So Dr. Gur previously has run this Dagon deck up against Amon Amarth in the previous 2 games. So Amon Amarth has seen some cards been play. For example, he did see a Mandrake from Dr. Gur. Again, that
Which
was...
I also think is just a pretty reasonable assumption coming out of most Dagon decks these days.
Right, that card is super popular in the meta, so even if you haven't seen it in previous games, it's still something you got to consider. He hasn't played it yet in this game, which is important to note, so it's still a possibility in the deck. So for Amon Amarth's position, it's kind of, alright, I have this huge, Hubert Wreck in my deck, which is getting pulled out with the ADC guaranteed. But I also have seen Dr. Gur play Mandrake in his deck before, and I haven't seen it yet this game. So the question kind of becomes, okay, do I think that I can win if he doesn't have the Mandrake if I keep both these cards in hand, right? Because it's either like play around the Mandrake and maybe get less overall power, or play into it or play around it, have less overall power, or play into it, but you get a bigger kind of overall gain with your cards. And it's kind of tough at this point, You see there's 6 cards left in Dr. Gur's deck, like he's got 3 cards in hand. He's probably going to hold on to a Mandrake, right, if he has it. I mean, you see 40 card full test, Hubert's there. So I wouldn't be too sad to see him hold on to the Bloody Baron. It does kind of hedge your bets against that again a little bit.
Yeah, I think if Dr. Gur ever had access to a Mandrake, it's not a card he would have ever mulliganed away in this matchup, particularly attached to the body, if he hits a Tribute or something like that. And One of the other points I'd like to bring up here is that we are losing the 9 base strength on the Bloody Baron, should we choose to mulligan that away, just to feed the Giant Hubert. And as I'll let Truedawn sort of take it away from here, as he was bringing up some very relevant points before we started this about the average value of a card in your deck versus the 9 strength of the Baron. So if you want to take it away from there with that sort of discussion.
So the green health in the Bloody Baron is staying on board regardless of what you do. It's either on the Bloody Baron or on the Hubert. You have anything you're mulliganing into, you have to just count the 9 versus whatever that is. So if you have things that are average like 10 or higher, you are gaining value by mulliganing the Bloody Baron. You're obviously putting all that strength on the Hubert, but you are gaining more points. Which in this scenario, I think you have to do, because you're just so far behind. I don't think we're beating Mandrake. I don't think we're beating Scorch, and you can't play around it. So you just have to try and maximize your draw. So depending upon what is remaining in the deck, even if you have a low chance to hit something that's worth a few points more, I think you have to do it just because of how far behind you are.
Yeah, I'm sort of in agreement here, because not only are we down a card, we're actually down a card plus 6 points of carryover on the other side of the board. So this is one of those stereotypical we need to high roll situations. I think you need to try and squeeze every point of value out of this hand, and I don't think that this is a situation that you're going to win against the Mandrake, even if you quote-unquote play around it, right? Because if we play around it here, we're never getting last say, and we certainly don't have double last say. So we're going to have to either get our Baron Mandrake, which is going to be worth 18 points, or the ADC into Hubert Mandrake, which is going to be some other ungodly amount of points. And I don't think that, given we're down an entire card plus 6 points, we're ever coming out ahead in any of those scenarios. So this might well come down to a straight math problem here.
Yeah, I mean, I might go on the other side of the fence. Like, so you guys are saying, assuming that the average value of the cards in his deck, Amon Amarth that is, being greater than Bloody Baron, you would still mulligan the Bloody Baron away.
I think even if there's a single card in his deck that's worth more than the 9 points, you have to mulligan it away. Even a 1 out of 14 chance here, I think, is a chance you have to take because of how egregiously far behind we are. A word I can say but not spell.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I mean, if Dr. Gur has the Mandrake, like, you kind of lose anyway, right? Because even if you are splitting that up, the Mandrake is still, like, 20-ish points. So yeah, I think I'm on your guys' side. I would probably mulligan the Baron, just because you kind of lose to the Mandrake anyway, yeah?
So what type of scenario would be required? Because it seems like we're all in agreement that mulliganing it away is probably proper here to try and min-max the raw amount of points you can put on board. How much of this situation do you think needs to be changed before it might become to correct to sort of diversify your threats and have a Baron plus a Hubert? Is it okay, for example, if the Barbagazi's not there? Is it okay, for example, if we know the Monsters player has played all 4 golds? Is it okay if we're on even cards but the Barbacoa is still there? What do you guys think would have to happen for it to potentially be correct to keep the Baron and sort of diversify your threats to play around the Mandrake here?
I mean, a like Scorch or Mandrake or whatever is so many, like, it's so far above average that I just think you have to pretend it doesn't exist. Because even if they don't have the Barbagazi, like, if they have that, like, card that just X's out whatever, like, either your Hubert or your Bloody Baron, whichever, it's just going to beat whatever you do. Because you just, like, you have 2 cards, they X one out with Mandrake, and then you're just 2v1 on your last card. So it's just, I don't think that, like, you would have to be 2v2. They wouldn't have to not be up a card in order for me to consider not going on.
What about with the Barbagazi there? Because let's say we're on even cards, right? Either add 1 card to the Northern Realm player's hand or take 1 card away from the monster player. Mandrake is a positive exchange, but it's not even that positive an exchange just on the Baron, right? Because the Baron has a base strength of 9, so you're sort of trading silver for gold, sure, but at the end of the day, a card for a card, and the Northern Realm player ends up with 3 points on the table. So do you think that if they're on even cards without the Barbagazi, that that's a reasonable risk to take there?
It would again depend upon how much upside you're getting. Like, if the upside play is +5 on the Baron, then probably. If you're just gaining like 2 on average, probably not.
Yeah, I think it depends also what you've seen from the Dagon at this point in the game as well. Like, if you're not seeing things like Ozrule and Siri Nova yet, and you know those are in the deck, like, you probably want to try and mulligan more to high roll, because if the Dagon player has an Ozrule in his hand, he's not going to mulligan that, right? and that's like a huge
It's very
power
unlikely
that's
that
going to beat you.
you're ever mulliganing. Agreed.
Yeah, so if I've seen a lot of those power plays already in the game, and then I could put them on something like maybe a Dow and an Argospore, then I can say, okay, I can maybe not have to get as many points to win the game. So that's what I would say. It all depends on what you've seen already in the game.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we can go ahead and take a look at the aftermath of this play here. And we have a Monomarth choosing to keep the Bloody Baron in his hand. Again, something that we all thought wasn't really that correct. And Dr. Gur looks like he won that round with the Dow, the Griffin, and the Ozreal. So again, like we said, he still had a lot of these powerful plays in hand. An important note, he did only win by 4 points there. So, you know, maybe if Monomarth had elected to try and get something a little better than the Baron, he could have won that game. And again, it all comes down to, you know, Dr. Gur having magic or not. You know, if he has the magic, he probably wins anyway. But in this case where he didn't, you could have maybe kind of stolen a win here by mulliganing the Baron.
And I think that's the key focal point. I think you just sort of have to pretend that Mandrake doesn't exist because it's not a card you're ever beating from this scenario. So in the world where your opponent can't possibly have a Mandrake, you're now putting him on some hands that you could potentially beat. And so theoretically, the 12 value, that's the green value on the Bloody Baron, that's staying either way. So if we're looking at just a 9-point card here, this is looking like a 13-point card from a Monomarth that could have tied the game, send it into a regame, and a 14-point card would have taken it there.
Yeah, and again, we don't unfortunately know the actual specifics of his deck in this spot, but the important thing to remember is to be able to recognize when you need to high roll, when even if you're on well, I have a bunch of dead cards in my deck, but if I get this one card, I probably win. Assess whether or not you need that one card. And in this spot, I think that Monomarth would have needed that one card. If there was something in his deck that was worth 15, then he wins.
Yeah,
even if it's only the one out of 14.
I'm in full agreement there. And as an interesting side note, not that this makes it correct or incorrect, but we can tell from the way that this game played out. In this particular scenario, had the 6-point Barbacoa not been there, this game goes to a Monomarth here. So even being down the card, he still had enough raw points while considering the lines with his Bloody Baron, and he chose a different line than we would have chosen. But once again, we don't have all of the information that he did at the time. But yeah, without that 6 points of carryover, it looks like he would have taken this game and the match.
Yeah, maybe he was just so confident he had so many points in 2 cards that he'd be fine anyway. And Dagon does have some slow tempo plays in there. If he had the Dow in hand without the Griffin, or maybe just an Archospore, that's a lot less points and could end up being the downfall. So it's again kind of recognizing when you're in a really bad spot, when your back is up against the wall. That's a big kind of skill that you need to learn, and also playing to your out. So figuring out what the out is to win the game when you're in that bad spot and playing towards it.
And as you were saying, particularly about the Dagon, these are, as someone who plays a lot of Dagon, these are some of the more interesting and rough situations you can get yourself into. A lot of times the Dagon player has a very good 1 to 2 card round and a very good 7 to 8 card round. Where they sort of suffer are those in-between rounds, like the 3 to 6 card rounds, where all of their cards aren't super high value, and there's not enough time to set up Dow into Griffin. There's not enough time to get value off of your Fog type of effects. And it's also a little bit longer than just your 1-card, 24-point slam it down finisher in something like Tribute, Monster's Nest, Eat a Spy. So these in-between rounds are sort of where you can get the Dagon player into kind of a wonky situation. And it looks like the Dagon player here, Dr. Gur, needed every last bit. He needed an extra card and 6 points of carryover just to get the job done.
Alright, so that is play 1, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you enjoyed that. Play 2, I want to see some predictions in the chat for this one. See if you can outguess the guys, but here we go into it. This is going to be the semifinals of the Wild Hunt. It is again Dr. Gur, who, funnily enough, won that last series, in part due to that game, that close finish. So go ahead to show you the importance of the little decisions here in winning games and winning tournaments. But it's Dr. Gur against Vishra. We have Dr. Gur on the Dagon and Vishra on the Henselt. This is round 1, kind of an interesting board state here. We see Dr. Gur up the card, but also down in points, implying him winning the coin flip, which is always good against Dagon. And, you know, he's got a lot of different kind of good options here in his hand. What are you guys thinking from his position? Do you think it's favorable for him? Do you think it's bad for him? And what do you think would be a good play to help him get ahead here?
Well, I think he's got a lot of options, but I sort of disagree with him having a lot of good options.
Yeah.
I think this is him trying, and the crux of this decision here is him trying to make the best of a bad decision. As you can see on board, he has several damage over time engines rocking. He's got the Larry on his center row, which is more or less going to guarantee a point because the fog will take care of the Ronvid. And then he's got the fog in the middle row, which is representing actual 2 points of value here. That being said, he's facing a 27-point deficit, and it doesn't look like he has a single play in his hand that's going to be able to overcome the gap in one card. So his decisions here are basically to pass, to throw a Hail Mary spy and hope his opponent does something dumb, or to commit to 2 cards to try and take the round. Where would you guys start breaking this play down here? What do you think, Truedawn?
Do we know what the Royal Decree is? I assume it's Siri Nova.
Yeah, I do believe Dr. Gur runs Siri Nova in his list.
Because it's unfortunate because Siri Nova's one short, right? Because with the
Yeah,
Royal
I
Decree,
don't
it's
think
one
Siri
short.
Nova would do it either. I'm actually pretty sure this is not a Siri Nova list from Dr.
Okay.
Gur. But
Well,
at least for the sake of this argument, even if it is Siri Nova, let's assume that the Royal Decree doesn't get the job done either.
Yeah, so in most scenarios, you're going to have to go down 2 cards here to pass.
Well, down 1 card, it's going to cost you 2.
Yeah,
You are up a
yeah,
card.
pen 2 cards to go down
Yes,
1 card.
okay.
Correct. Yeah. And you have to then decide how important initiatives to you, how much you care about last word. If it doesn't matter, you do have the Frightener, which you do want to get value from. If you end up losing the round, you have to mulligan the Frightener. That may screw you up in other ways. But you do need, the main assessment here is deciding how much you care about winning the round, how much that initiative matters to you. If it doesn't, you probably are just going to be content to like lose for value, like just lose up a card, and like try and defend it with your Frightener if they have Thaler to offset that, stuff like that. It doesn't seem like you're going to be able to win this profitably unless you really care about that initiative, which in this matchup I'm not sure that you do.
See, that's interesting because I agree with your assessment. I sort of give a little bit of extra value to the initiative here because we haven't seen the Thaler come down from the Henselt player yet, and they can, if you give them the round, they can certainly use that to their advantage by draining you as long as they want in round 2, procking their light cavalry, etc., etc., etc. As a Dagon player, I'm always fairly nervous to concede around to Henselt players. Dr. Gur is in the fortunate position of having the coin toss here. I'm curious, what do you think, Shue? Where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, I think when you're considering kind of whether you want to win this round or lose this round, you have to really consider the matchup. Like, everyone knows kind of what Henselt in general is trying to do, at least in this stage of the meta. They're trying to scorch you, they're trying to set up machines, do some damage, and they're trying to finish with a big Bloody Baron, right? There are still some Henselts out there running around that are kind of on the Bork plan, but that's a little bit less rare nowadays than the Bloody Baron, I think. But either way, it's good to remember that against Henselt, if you bleed them, then you kind of mess up that round 3 kind of contingency, yeah? Like the Bork, you need 3 turns for that to go off, and you're trying to do it in a favorable way. And even the Bloody Baron, like if you can force that out in a round 2, force them into a top deck, I mean, Henselt has a lot of machines, you know, that aren't worth a lot. Even Shani is kind of way worse than she was as like a finisher. So if you can kind of bleed Henselt, I actually like that a lot. And I think going down 1 card to win the round isn't really bad at all, especially when you have the Frightener in hand. Like, that's just getting that card back right away and allowing you to bleed the Henselt further, you know, granted if they don't have Thaler or not, but even if they do, it's not too bad.
My issue with that would be that when you exchange spies with the Henselt player in round 2, especially given this particular situation here, they have a Ronvid. So assuming, you know, Light Cavalry's not going to proc because you're both basically exchanging spies, but they wind up with a free point, so you have to eventually challenge them to a tempo contest to get your card back here, right? That would sort of be my contention. I think if the Ronvid's not on the board, I'm sort of more online with your line of play here, but I think the Frightener could potentially be very, very awkward to hang around in your hand at this point. What do you think, Truedawn?
I mean, you're not like if you lose up a card, you're not keeping that card. Even like the Frightener is just essentially preventing you from getting blown out by like cavalry. It's not going to actually be able to defend the card because of the Ronvid, like you said. But you have to assess like, is that fine? Like, what is your best case scenario here? How likely is it that you can like bleed them to 1 or 2 if you like push all the way in and win the round? How good is that? How bad are their last 2 cards? I think that you're usually going to be facing down stuff like Bloody Baron and Shani, which are pretty strong in a short round. So I think that trying to win the round down a card and then trying to get that card back is actually going to be incredibly difficult, especially if they have the
I
power.
agree.
And the downside of losing the round for valor isn't that bad. You're both going to be on even. They get to dictate the terms of the round, but you're in such a bad spot. I think you just have to deal with it. I'm not really seeing a better line of play because shoving on them seems like it's going to result in you playing round 3 down a card at a higher percentage of the time.
So I'm in agreement with you here. It seems Shu has a little bit of a disagreement with us. But before we kick it back to him, I want to ask your opinion on this situation. If that's the world we're living in, where we're okay losing the round but up a card here, do you ever give any consideration to throwing your Frightener down on the table now as effectively a free mulligan, gives you more information about your potential mulligan later? You're making it much more likely that they're going to proc their light cav, but it gives you more information about your own hand, and it also opens up. Now, obviously, we're at a high level tournament. We're in the semifinals. It's very unlikely Vistra makes a stupid error like continues to play into it, but it's a non-0% chance that your opponent will play another card and make a large mistake there. What do you think about that?
I think Thaler's such a blowout, you need to keep it, and it's unlikely they try to shove 2-0. And that's the only way you get punished for that, is if they like shove all in round 2. They're usually not going to bleed you down that far, and then you can just mulligan the Frightener before round 3. I think you just go so savage by Thaler, you need to keep it.
Yeah, honestly, I think there's never a world in which you Frightener here, round 1, down so many points. Like, in this type of tournament, this far into it, like, no player is ever going to not pass in that situation, and then you're kind of screwed. I would even, if Dr. Gur decides to pass here, I would even like to see him keep that Frightener, because, take the scenario where Vistra does have the Thaler in his hand, then he can plop that down and you have no way to answer that then. So you're allowing him to bleed you while getting that card back. And also, like, Frightener is pretty useful even in a later round, if you kind of, stay ahead on cards and then you can plop Frightener down in the last round and, like, kind of get last say that way. You have a Mandrake in deck or something, you can kind of counter that Bloody Baron. That's pretty big. And it's even good to, like, block Scorch, which isn't, like, super uncommon in Henselt. So I think if you're going to kind of give the round away here, I would like to hold on to the Frightener.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point you bring up. Now, I think that point is even more true with Henselt decks of the past that relied upon Bork instead of Bloody Baron as the finisher, because then there's a ton of value because you're blocking Scorch and Bork by holding on to the Frightener. Here, I still think you're definitely getting a solid amount of value by holding on to it, though. And like forcing them to mulligan a Scorch, and then, or if they go for the Thaler in round 2, you can potentially brick their draws with the light cab, make some of their draws awkward. Obviously, we can see that Vistra's hand is very, very powerful here, but if you're in Dr. Gur's seat, you do not know that that's the case. So I sort of am in agreement with both of you guys here. I would just hold on to it, but I don't think it's crazy to play the Frightener either. I'm probably the closest.
I think you're crazy.
Playing it of you guys, yeah. You guys think I'm crazy. I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's right, but I think it's reasonably close.
If you think it's only correct to do that if you think it's dead, and I don't think it's going to be dead like very often. It's also another point worth noting. If you shove to try and win the round, you have to expend at least 1 gold, depending upon how far Vistra tries to play. Which the K-Ran is of debatable value because they've already used Henselt. You can't like cut them off of that, like to figure out which they're going to go for and then K-Ran it. So that card's probably pretty marginal. So getting rid of that isn't the worst thing in the world. But say for example, like you play Cyclops with the intent to shove to win the round, and Vistra plays another card. What do you do now? Like, you have to Royal Decree for your last gold and K-Ran, and then you just have Brewess left? Like, that seems pretty bad.
Yeah, you can never even commit the Brewess, in my opinion, unless a very weird situation comes about even with the stock graveyard. This is, in fact, my favorite gold, potentially besides Muzzle, against the Henselt player, because it is a large amount of points that's good in short rounds and medium and long rounds and doesn't die to a single Scorch, right? It's a gold that produces long-term value, a bunch of points up front, and it's on multiple bodies. It's sort of Henselt's nightmare. So I think saving Brewis is at a very, very real premium against Henselt.
Yeah, to your point, Truedawn, I don't think I mind dumping something out like the Cyclops. I mean, worst comes to worst, he plays a bronze, you trade bronze for bronze, and you get rid of what's arguably not like a great card in your hand, especially one that kind of relies on synergy and other cards.
Well, what card are we pitching past there, though? Like, if you play Cyclops, then he plays bronze, right? Like, take the random bronze machine in his hand. Isn't that a really unfavorable exchange for us, then, to have to go gold for bronze?
It depends upon... Well, so what you can do is you can test the waters with the Cyclops. You just say, I'll play the Cyclops, and then if they play a thing, then I'll get out of the round, and if they don't, I'll...
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. That's certainly fair.
Yeah, and it's kind of like a free roll jab, you know. Say I play the Cyclops, like he might have golds and silvers in hand and might, you know, want to pitch one of those out, and then you're up a favorable trade. But if he does take play a bronze from his hand, that's fine. That's even for us, and we're in the same position, I think.
Yeah, you can only do that line though if you're okay with like winning down a card, which I'm not convinced we are.
Right.
Yeah, I think you have to be, because if he calls your bluff on the Cyclops and doesn't play into you, you have to be okay committing another card. Because there's zero world where you go Cyclops, he passes, you pass, right?
Yeah,
that's just like not a thing you can do.
No. I mean, I think I'm okay with, committing the other card in the form of like a K-Ran or something. Again, it's not the best card. It's somewhat reactive in a short round. You might blank on that. So I personally would probably like throw down the Cyclops or the K-Ran right now. Probably Cyclops first, just for that kind of free roll value, like we said. And then, if Fisher passes, I'm happy to slap down that K-Ran. I mean, get initiative for the rest of the game. Possibly bleed Henselt out of its finishers. Like, I think I'm on board with that. You guys seem like you want to just get out of the round, though, yeah?
Yeah, the K-Ran still means a lot to me here. It certainly means a lot less since the Henselt has already come down from Vishra here. Because now K-Ran's not a potential tool to deny his, the main engine of his deck. K-Ran is just strictly a point play, and while it's a good way to slap, 16 to 19 points down on the board, because it's not all concentrated in one body, you are removing one of their bodies from the board, so you're not fully vulnerable to Scorch. It's still a pretty nice play, but it's not optimal anymore, since they do, he did already get value out of the Henselt, which, if the Henselt's still there, I think K-Ran is a premium level carding.
Yeah, it's just if you push to win the round down a card, and they have Thaler, you're in such bad shape because you then have to defend the card through raw points, and maybe you could do that, but it seems unlikely, especially after you just had to commit the K-Ran to get to this point. So I just think your best bet is to lose for value here and just get out of the round.
At this point, how much value are we actually giving to the Cyclops as well? Now, we don't know whether Dr. Gur had the chance to watch any of Vishra's previous matches, because Vishra was on, the Spotlight, the feature match earlier, so he might be able to know that he's on Bloody Baron, for example. And Bloody Baron and Bork don't often run in the same deck. But assuming you're going in blind, you're just playing against Vishra with Henselt, and you see the cards that you've seen so far, sometimes Cyclops can be used to make something like an Algul, or an Azrael, sorry, and then throw that at the board to effectively counter it. How much value do you think the Cyclops has in the long term?
I mean, you have the Brew-S, so he's always going to have reasonable targets, like in later rounds. He's probably going to be pretty reasonable. There's definitely the potential that because all of Henselt's cards are fairly small bodies, you might lose some damage on the front end, but usually you're sacrificing a 6 or a 7, and most of their stuff is 6 and 7, so it should be fine. So, I mean, yeah, it's good, but it's probably about approximate value to the other bronzes in your deck.
Yeah, I think if you are worried about Bork, I mean, you have the Frightener to kind of block it, so I think you're good on that front. And if you are in a situation where you control round 2, then you kind of can, play around it just with bleeding in that way anyway. So, yeah, that's... I wouldn't say I'm too worried about having to retain that removal for the Villain Trentmer.
If you do go along the route, let's say you play Cyclops, they pass you, but then you commit your K-Ram. What is your plan in round 2? And I don't know where I stand on this. I'm just hypothetically asking. Are we looking to commit Brewis in round 2 just to try and bleed and push and get as many valuable resources out of them as possible? Because Northern Realms is known to be a faction that wants to hold on to certain cards until round 3. Do we try and bleed them there, or do we just try and say, hey, okay, we'll take our card back, we'll cut our losses, and move along to round 3?
I'm a big fan of the bleeding against Henselt, personally.
I mean, it depends upon largely like what that Royal Decree is, because if that's a reasonable finisher that you're comfortable playing in a 1 or 2 card round, then sure you could win down a card, immediately play Brewess, get your Archospores back, and try and scrap it out. But if committing the Brewess is losing your finisher, then that line becomes a lot more dubious. So it would depend upon what the Royal Decree was, but it's so rough to try and fight Henselt on that basis, but maybe it's possible.
It's something I'm actually still working out. Dealing with the new version of Henselt, I'm sort of, when I play against Henselt on the ladder, because I play a lot of Dagon, I'm still sort of working out the best possible strategies and building up my sample size. I've had mixed success trying both different types of strategies. If he was guaranteed to be a Bork deck, I love the bleed, because eventually he has to slam down a dumb tempo point gold that does nothing. You gain your tempo, you pass, and then generally you're ahead. But the whole Bloody Baron thing has sort of added a new dimension to this matchup that makes it a lot more difficult from the monster side.
Yeah, that's why it's so good, these new Bloody Baron versions, because you can't bleed that out, you know, it's way harder. And it's arguably a better finisher than Bork, you know, you can't remove it with something like Viper Witchers, which you can with Bork. Or like Mandrake or all that stuff. Like, removal is really popular, and Bloody Baron is just big old points. You can't really remove that per se without a Scorch.
Yeah, there's certainly an argument for like trying to shove for 2-0 because their long round is gone. They can't fight on that axis anymore. You have presumably 2 Archospores, at least 1 definitely, and maybe you could just get them like by having inevitability they don't. Like if, for example, especially if that Royal Decree is Woodland Spirit, then you could just like have Woodland Spirit and Brewess and just get them.
Yeah, for sure. Anyway, I was just gonna say, I think we've been going on long enough. We can see what
let's take a look at what he actually does.
Dr. Gerd decides to do, and he does end up going with you guys and just smashing the pass. I think, if I remember this correctly, that Vischer does end up taking this game. I don't remember exactly how, but I know that Vischer does end up winning.
Well, yeah, because Dr. Gerd just lives in that O2 hole and just reverse sweep the shit out of everybody.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's how Dr. Gerd thrives. He's got to feel the pressure.
Yeah, so we see he ends up going with you guys. Doesn't quite work out for him, but again, the Henselt is pretty powerful, so it's hard. But
and particularly these Bloody Baron versions, I still think the matchup's Dagon favored. But given a correct pilot, God, is it not a fun matchup to play against.
And Vischer's hand is really good, too, in this scenario as well.
His hand's very good,
so,
and he's no slouch of a player.
Right. So, tough spot to be in overall. But anyways, guys, so that was our kind of play analysis segment where we go through and analyze some plays. Let us know what you guys think of it. Again, it's the first week we're doing it, so we're trying to, iron out the details, make it as good as possible. But now I think we're going to move on to another segment, and this one we have actually done before, and it was a quite well received, I would say. Don't you say, Joe?
Yeah, this is a lot of fun. So we've put together another list for you guys. I think these are sort of fun. You can debate, are we right, are we wrong, are we idiots? Probably, me, definitely. But so we sort of put together a top 5 list of something from Gwent history. So what do we have here today, guys?
This is a fun one. It is the strongest decks in Gwent history, the entire history of Gwent, in our humble opinion here. Just kind of trip down memory lane. What were the most disgusting decks that you just hated to play against, going all the way back to closed beta? And I think this is going to be a fun one here. So without further ado, we'll start with the number 5 in our list, and then at the end we'll get to our honorable mentions. But we're going from...
I still like doing the honorable mentions first, but all right, Shue, you're captain.
Anyway, we'll go for 5. We'll do the honorable mentions first. So this is in order of power, 5 being, the 5th strongest deck in history, and 1 being just the worst, in our opinion. But with number 5 here, we've got the Emir Spies version. Now, this deck was really powerful for a long period of time on top of the meta. We put it at number 5, I think, because it wasn't super disgusting. I think a lot of people found this list to be, difficult to pilot and pretty fair. What do you guys think about that?
So
I
I
mean-
think
This deck could be like described as like the deck that's existed since Amir was Movran.
yeah, basically.
Yeah, like it's had like the Bork finisher at various points, like when Gold Immunity was a thing, but just the core of Spy, like Emissary, Brigade, Enforcer, all of that nonsense been around forever, and it's always been like incredibly powerful. This is like the first patch since Open Beta where it has not been. So it's definitely like one of the stronger decks, mainly because of how consistent it was. It just did the same thing every time.
So, quick aside, because I am seeing some stuff in the chat, this list is starting once the Nilfgaard faction was introduced into the open beta. This list is from when all 5 factions were available and on. We're not taking crazy early beta stuff into account before there was all 5 factions. That being said, I'm with Truedawn here. This deck has just been a powerful force because it does the same thing every game. It sees its deck the entire game. Its plan is good. It is powerful. Right now, it's not in the greatest spot, but this is the first time in, 4, 5, 6 patches
This is the
Amir's
first time since Open Beta, yeah.
Yeah, that it's just not, like, top tier up there. This deck has always just been a force to be reckoned with, and your deck always sort of had to pass the Spy test. Well, how is its Spy matchup? If the answer was really bad, it needed to be really good everywhere else, or it was not going to be a playable deck.
And one of the things that made this so strong, too, and why it was so strong for a while, is it just had the best finisher in the game. I mean, you play Rainfarn into Joachim into, like, a huge unit, and that is just super backbreaking. I think that's part of the reason why it's not so great now, is that with the, advent of, like, Ciri Nova and cards like Olaf and things like that, a lot of these decks have gotten kind of these strong finishers to compete with the Spies. So one of its, like, most powerful abilities is now kind of every other deck has it, and it was something that did put it head and shoulders above everything else back in the day.
I think that's a really relevant point. Like, Rainfarm came into, what was it, the Nausicaa Brigade?
Yeah.
I believe was the one that used to always come out. Like, that used to be the unparalleled best finisher in Gwent. And now we're seeing a lot of other deck types, a lot of other factions have very comparable and oftentimes better finishers than that. So Rainfarn's being used more for Cantarella shenanigans at the time, and it no longer has the best short round and the best long round in Gwent. The trick to beating this deck oftentimes was to make it play medium length rounds, where you get them to commit a few of their engine pieces, but not enough that they can just take you for everything you're worth and then get down to a 1-card round. You sort of had to split them up, but now other decks have game in these areas as well.
I think that that's actually more ancillary to like why this deck is worse, and the main reason why it's not as oppressive as it has been in the past is because other decks closed the consistency gap. A lot of other factions got a lot more tools to be more consistent, like Svelga got Pirate Captain and Heim, so they found their spies just as often, they found all their decks stuck in their deck just as often. Squayatel had all of the text removed from their bronzes to just 50 of the same card. So like that deck does the same thing every time. The reason that deck was so good is because its average draw was so much higher than everyone else's average draw. Like, even if you had another deck that had a better like nut draw or a better ceiling, it didn't matter because the Nilfgaard deck just did the same thing every time, and just their average was going to beat you like just a very high percentage of the time. So even if you had a deck that was ostensibly better, it just wasn't more consistent, and Nilfgaard wrecked it.
Well, I think you said what I was trying to say, but better, so. Nicely done, sir.
Yeah, so that is our number 5 Amir Spies. Moving on, number 4 here, we've got another crazy one. It is the Frost Axeman, specifically with the Canby version, back when golds were immune and Frost was dealing, what was it, 1 damage to
everything in a row.
Yeah, something insane like that.
Yeah, and Axemans were all Duran, so they were all silver cards.
They were actually strictly better than Duran because they had
armor.
Armor, yeah.
But they were weaker though. I think they started at 3 maybe back then.
They
but
did start at 3.
They had veteran though.
Yeah, they did have veteran.
Yes, they had veteran.
Yeah.
So like this was a world where in Axeman mirrors you were incentivized to discard cards instead of playing them.
Yeah,
because you're buffing your opponent's
real bad.
Axeman.
Yeah.
For me personally, this was the least fun time to play Gwent ever. It was just a complete nightmare. Like, what are you supposed to do? Nothing. It was just all weather, and the deck got to play, what, 8 copies of a silver card between the Axeman, the Priestess of Freya, and the Sigdrifa. Like, they just had 7 or 8 Darrens.
Yeah, it was pretty wild. This
Kalmar was untouchable.
This Frost, like, this is actually the one reason I hate this deck is because Biting Frost had to die for Axeman's sins. Like, I thought Biting Frost was actually like a totally reasonable weather that like was good to punish row stacking. Well, back when like rows mattered, but like it was good to punish like row stacking and stuff, and had a really cool dynamic alongside of rain and fog. It did something unique. But it was obviously way too oppressive with Axeman, and I would have preferred that they changed Axeman instead of Frost. They ended up doing both over time, but they initially changed Frost. I was very sad.
I feel the same way about you, Truedawn, but instead of the Frost, it's with Canby, man. That poor card has just been hammered over the patches. It was super good in this list, but I think it was more of a dynamic where it was only good because the Axemen were so insane, right? Like, you can force people, you know, with Canby, like, it's super good in round 3 back in the days when it was gold immune and you could play like Hjalmar into it and things like that. But in order to get there, but in order to get there, you had to get to round 3 with like card advantage. You also needed to have all your gold. You also needed to draw through your deck. And I think that like the Axemen being so good with the Frost kind of allowed you to do that, to get to that like round 3 ideal condition with Canby. And it was pretty easy to get there too, right? Like, no one could beat you in a long round. Like, they
couldn't.
It's just inevitability. You're gonna have to pass eventually and give up that round. So I think that was kind of really sad part about this thing, is it led to kind of Canby's demise along with the gold immunity change.
There was a time where I was teching in 2 to 3 Demeridium Shackles in every deck I built. And it was like, okay, let's get to round 3, and I'll just hit their Hjalmar, I'll hit their Avalok, and, you know, I hope it's good enough, man. Like, that was the world we lived in.
Yeah. I actually have an extra submission to this list. In my opinion, the best deck I ever played, may or may not be the best deck in the game, best deck I ever played by a amount that is not close, was Croc right when Open Beta came out.
Yeah.
When you had both Gold Weathers and Ciri, and Hjalmar was the best gold in the game, outside of Ciri. And you just like had Croc into Morkvarg back when he only went -3.
-2. It was -2.
Oh, yeah,
Trust me, I was playing Skoy and Tal. I know. Yeah. That shit hurt.
This is actually what I was like. I actually did things in the game. But you had superior carryover to every other faction. You just always had carryover. You always
immune to Scorch.
Yeah, you just had your Spy. You had Ciri. Like, the deck was complete nonsense. You had the Gold Weather. You could do everything. I actually love that format. Even though there were like a bunch of egregious cards in that format, like 3 damage Gold Weather and Immune Ciri, like, the gameplay was incredibly fun. Because
if you were playing the Crack Mirror.
Like, Croc versus, like, because that was when Nilfgaard was good. People didn't like understand Nilfgaard was good back then because the ceiling was really high. It was like only like JJ was playing it, because he was like it was him and Petrify were like the only 2 people good enough to play it back then. And like the mirror, or like that matchup was really, really interesting. Like, that was super fun.
Yeah.
I loved playing, like, it was not a healthy format because it was just SK and Nilfgaard. Like, it was a joke to play anything else. But those games were still super fun.
Yeah, that was really good. And then they actually nerfed Nilfgaard, which kind of led to this, like, during this Frost Axeman Canby time, where like that and Crack were just like the 2 top dogs, unquestioned. And the only thing that could really compete with it was Monsters, which I think during that time you were talking about, Truedawn, was kind of a real underdog because they were good right at that beginning of Open Beta, but people just didn't really realize it. And they kind of flew under the
faction passive, and everyone was like, it's unplayable now.
Yeah. They flew under the radar, so when they nerfed the Nilfgaard, and in this meta, now it was kind of like Skellige and kind of monsters going up against it. And that was a time when Succubus was really good too, you know, especially against this. It was 4
because
points.
You had to steal their Morkvarg. That was the thing. You legitimately had to Succubus round 1 to steal like the 11 or 13 strength Morkvarg. Otherwise, you couldn't win the game. That was how the game played out. It was insane. It was really just because of how good Morkvarg was.
Yeah.
Well, even the Axeman,
that was your plan.
Even the Axeman, it's great against that. Like, you wait till they build up a 40-point Axeman and steal it, you know? But yeah, this time was definitely Skellige dominance, and it was hard picking between the 2.
What do we have next up on that list 3 now?
Yeah, next I think, speaking about monsters, we have Close Beta Consume. So Joe, you are our monsters expert. Why don't you run through this one?
Yeah. So for those of you who didn't play during closed beta, there was this fun little card called Monster Nest, which you guys might recognize from the game these days. Except it didn't do what it did. It took any unit with the breedable tag, I believe it was, and made an additional 3 of them on the row.
I legit forgot about this.
Yeah, so Neckers had this cool little tag called breedable on them. So you would play a Monster's Nest to generate 3 additional Neckers. Imagine Brewis with no setup. You could play in round 1 and made 3 Neckers instead. On a silver card. It did this. And then all of your Neckers would carry over to the next round, sometimes resulting in 80 or 90 point carryover. Plus the faction passive. It was completely fair and balanced, though. Totally fine.
Yeah, it was completely ridiculous. It was like playing the super all-in spam build of Consume from like this previous patch, but without any of the setup.
Yeah, with no setup and all the carryover.
Yeah.
Exactly, it just happened.
Existed. And yeah, your carryover wasn't like a 6-point Barbaghasi, it was like a 25-point Necker.
Was Monster Nest actually bronze at the time? I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been bronze. You might have played 2 of them.
That would have been way earlier in open or in closed.
I think it was a bronze, actually, yeah.
I think it was a bronze, too.
When I played it with silver. But
and
I got in fairly late.
The insane part about this deck, too, is like, you know, you have this kind of bananas consume carryover package that you run with it. But
it was bronze, yeah.
All your ancillary cards are insane too. You had Avalok, which was an 8-point spy, which was like the best spy in the game, despite being gold. You know, it was still just insane because you're drawing 2 cards and your opponent's drawing 1, so you're getting through your deck, which it was a little difficult for Monster at that time, and you're getting a card for only 8 points. You also had things like Caretaker, which was insane at that time, and you had cards like Old Spear Tip too.
Sticks.
Yeah,
Old Spear Tip. Old Spear Tip was a silver card that was sometimes worth 60 points of value.
Yeah, it did damage to an entire row, and this was back in the day where you can row stack. You know, a lot of decks did row stack, and you could fit as many units onto the row as possible. Like, it was just bananas, man. This deck did everything really well.
It did work. There was also this thing called a faction passive, and the Monsters one was the last unit that you played from hand would carry over to the next round. So if the last unit that you played from hand was, say, a Vran Warrior that's been munching on Neckers, you could easily accomplish 40 carryover on a Vran Warrior, or, you know, a 25 strength Ekamara plus all of your Neckers. It wasn't, like, unrealistically common to see 60 or 70 point carryovers.
Yeah, you guys are making me nostalgic about, like, all these cards that were, like, well-designed, but because they were broken, they just scrapped them.
Yes, they were well-designed, but broken. Like, Spear Tip? How did you beat that card in the Consume Mirror? It was just who played it last.
Well,
yeah.
Arachasol went to 1 row.
There was interesting gameplay surrounding that, because, like, you had to, like, flip it a bunch, and, like, you could... Well, I mean, like, no one played removal, but ostensibly you could remove it. Like, it was just a conscious choice that no one was running removal.
Yeah. These cards are just... They're so different now from then. It's kind of fun to go back and like, yeah, remember when this card did this? Like,
yeah, multiple changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. It would have been interesting to see that instead of like them scrapping a lot of the, because like all of this stuff was really cool, and like yeah, it was busted, but that's like a power level issue, not a design issue, and they ended up like redesigning a lot of these cards when they didn't necessarily need to, and it removed a lot from the game. Like, I haven't had as much fun playing Gwent as I did back when Open Beta first came out, and there was a bunch of busted stuff. And, like, yeah, it was busted, but the game was fun. And now, like, everything...
The gameplay like, felt better.
Like, now you could argue that everything's pretty balanced, and it's, like, boring. It's like, I don't get to do interesting things in the game. Like, what's the most interesting thing you've done in a game of constructed Gwent in the past month?
Well, I think the thing is, too, is that closed beta had these busted decks, but, like, every deck was busted. I mean, you'll see the top 3 in our list are all closed beta decks, and there's, like, a lot of great ones that we left off the list that, you know, like...
One that I think should have made the list, but we'll get there.
Yeah, I mean, even stuff that wasn't, like, super busted, but was still really good, like War-Crying Skellige, when you could just double everything's power on your board.
That
like,
was a cool deck. I don't think it was busted. That deck was cool, though.
Yeah.
I legit forgot that Self-Wound was an entire archetype.
Yeah.
That Judah is the lone survivor of for some reason.
The worst card.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, moving on to the next one. So we saw how good carryover was with Consume, But this next deck, the carryover dwarves, just kind of took that to another extreme. What do you guys think about carryover dwarves?
So this isn't even
there
a.
should probably be one, right?
It could be one.
I don't know. When you see one, I think you'll have to agree. If not, I think number one is correct.
I actually never played against one, so that's probably my favorite.
Fair.
I came in after that got patched.
Okay.
Yeah. See, okay, carryover dwarves was insane. Back in closed beta, you stacked your entire melee row with Markham defenders, things like that. Then you would play Hawker supports, which buffed everything on your entire row by, what was it, like 2
Thanks
or 3?
for this deck, Swim. Thanks.
Then you also played Commander's Horn, which buffed everything on your entire row by like 2 or 3. Like, this was insane. Not only that, but this deck has survived a long time. I mean, there was a point during like the Dagon meta where you were playing carryover dwarves, and it was a little different. You're running like Thunderbolt potions and things like that, but you were just abusing the fact that you would build up this tall monstrosities with a lot of points that could win you a round. And then if you can't beat me, well, I'm winning the next round too because I have 80 points of carryover. Like, it was pretty insane.
It took them a long time to realize that carryover asymmetry was a massive problem for the balance of the game.
Yeah. This deck survived into a whole nother, like, realm of metas with Ifley and Thunderbolt Potion on carryover dwarves. And, like, now this deck wasn't nearly as good as the original version of carryover dwarves, but there also wasn't 100-point aeromancies on your single row to try and fight it. You know, the tools to fight it were also hugely nerfed. I mean, just carryover in general, and those type of numbers, when you're carrying over 30, 40, 50 points, what do you do there? You have to win round one or you lose the game. It was essentially one round Gwent. How good is your opening hand? And their entire deck was built to be amazing at winning one round.
Yeah, I mean, it was carryover with tempo. I mean, you had those cards that buffed the entire row, and then you slapped in, like, Synthesis, which back in the day just buffed every card on your side of the board by one and destroyed every card on the other side of the board by one. So you're getting this carryover, buffing it up, and also getting, like, a 30-point play with it while you're doing that. So it was just kind of insane in my view, the power of this deck.
It was also super fresh. Oh, sorry, go.
I was just gonna say that effect has been on 2 different cards. Like, Saskia had that back when she was called Saskia, and that was like the first version of Ragnarok. It was like,
yes,
buff all of your stuff, damage all of their stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't remember
I did
that.
it twice. It was busted both times.
Yeah, I mean, what was the way you even counted this? Was it just like weather the melee? But I think they run like clear skies too.
That was
like
a route,
you have to last play weather this deck. This is what you did.
They had the armor potion too, right? That was a thing back then, or was that later?
The armor potion was with that was the Midland version of the deck.
Yeah,
that was the second or third time this deck was busted.
So many versions of this deck that have been egregious.
Yeah, D-Bomb, when D-Bomb hit a whole row, as Wriggle in the chat is saying, that was one of the answers. Or you played our number one deck on this list, guaranteed yourself card advantage, and back in the day in closed beta, for those of you who don't know, Weather used to take every unit in a row and turn it to 1 strength. Whatever it was at, now it's a 1. It doesn't matter. It could have been a 25, it's now a 1. And Aeromancy applied to Weather to any row. So that was how you beat this deck, but it was basically the only one.
And
all Bronze Weathers were old corals.
Yeah, Bronze Weathers were old. Yeah, were old corals. That's so filthy.
Yeah.
Not only that, man, you have this ability, which our number 1 deck on the list happened to abuse, which was your getting to decide the coin flip as your faction passive.
Isn't like Milva Roach was a thing too? So you like double dip.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
it's triple dip. So this deck,
We can move on to number 1 right now, since we're already talking about it. But yeah,
we're sort of going there. Yeah, number 1 on the list being closed beta Scoia'tael Control. It took a while for this deck to really come to prominence, but as someone who finished top 50 in closed beta in the season, this was 75 to 80% of the top of the ladder. This was the deck. This deck was beyond busted. It was card advantage deck. Your faction passive was for one of the 3 rounds, whichever one you felt like. You got to pick who went first. Seems totally reasonable. You also had Gold Siri, which was uninteractable 6-point neutral spy. Great. Then you had the Milva plus Roach combination, should you ever want to save your faction passive, or in the mirror where it didn't work, and you lost the coin toss, you would play Milva, it would pull Roach, it would bounce back to your hand, boom. Now you're ahead on tempo. and back in coin toss position. This was the sickest deck I've ever played in my life. It was making use of Saskia as Truedawn and ShoePlays referenced earlier. So you basically couldn't lose round 1, because if round 1 went long, you would just play like an 8 or 9 strength dragon that buffed all of your guys by 1 and did 1 damage to all of their guys. Casual 50-point play.
Yeah, imagine Ithlin Tremors, but it also buffs your guys by 2.
Yeah, but it also buffs your guys, and then you finish the game with an ambush unit that was completely uninteractable by any means. Locks didn't hit ambushes back in the day. Nothing hit them. It didn't matter. Life didn't matter.
Only Meren.
Or weather. So if you could correctly predict the row, because some cards were still row locked, so if you knew which card they were going to have, you could preemptively Aeromancy the Cheruvial, causing it to flip, and then it would get turned down to 1. Which is why you had to, in my opinion, I had success playing Kieran back in the day, to make sure I had last say in these nonsensical mirrors, so that I could hit their dumb ambush unit.
There was also, like, the period of time that lasted into open beta where Morin was counterspell. Like,
yes.
if Morin killed the unit that
well, I think it was Ida. Ida was counterspell.
Yeah, Ida, yeah.
Well, Ida was, like, literally counterspell, but Morin worked for a very long time where if the damage killed the unit, it didn't trigger.
Yes, that's
So,
fair,
like, if you played a Freya into Morin, nothing happened.
Well, this was still when Morin was destroying ambush unit. So, a lot of times, Joe covered a lot of the bust stuff in this deck, but that doesn't even cover the scratch the surface.
It doesn't even scratch the surface. All of that was the regular busted stuff.
There was a version where you would operate a ambush card in your hand, right? Then you would be able to hand buff it up, uninteractable, so that's your finisher for the game. And then if they played their ambush card, which you force them to have with the operator in like round 3 or something, then you're just killing it with Meren. And I believe that operator could also copy the ambush while it had the buffs, right? That's how that worked. I'm pretty certain on that, but I could be wrong.
I'm not 100%. I didn't.
I remember it used to do silvers. Yeah.
Yeah,
you did silvers. Yeah, copied silvers, but I don't know if it copied the buffer.
Yeah, so that was insane. That was kind of another version of this list. But you also had kind of like this insane spell package where you're running Ice and Grim. So every time you play a spell, you're summoning a 3-point Neophyte. And then you had 4-point Elven Mercenaries. 4-point loyal Elven Mercenaries that would pull spells from your deck. Yeah. And it could pull silvers as well. Like, it was insane, dude. It was insane. And you had Dragoons, which are buffing a card by 3 in your hand, so you're putting on the ambush. It's uninteractable. Nothing in the game could stop it besides other Scoia'tael decks. Like, it was just crazy. It was crazy. Similar to Joe, I remember super vividly, like, trying to climb to top 1,000 that closed beta season, just see if I could do it, and, like, I ended up failing, and I would look at my stats, and I would just see, like, 30 out of 60 games were just Scoia'tael, like this deck, because it was so busted.
It only got higher percentages the higher up you got. The deck was completely insane, and the thing is, the gameplay was actually very fun when you played against anything but the mirror. But the Scoia'tael mirror was like, who won coin toss, who drew Milva, who drew Ciri. It was just a checklist you would go down. So that part wasn't exactly the most fun to play. But I do believe that fundamentally this was the most broken deck of all time, in large part due to the Scoia'tael faction passive. Just being wildly out of line with everything.
Yeah, it was just coin flip incarnate. Like, it was so silly. But
should be an honorable mention to Mulligan Scoia'tael, because like the deck that they just straight forgot to playtest. And then, like, it's like, oh, Verheed Dragoons 20. Oops. Like, and, like, that was a thing for, like, a week or whatever they changed it.
Yeah.
But, like, that deck was pretty egregious when it first came out.
Another one I wanted to talk about, which I think should be at number 5 on this list, but, hey, I am not the dictator here, and I was outvoted. I think that when Dagon was good, the good old-fashioned Swarm Dagon, a lot of people were playing, like, the Mago King Dagon. I was playing Dagon Giants. That was the first time I ever hit number 1 global, was with like the Jotun old spear tip, flip him a bunch of times Dagon deck. And it was just Dagon mirrors in, as far as the eye could see on ladder. That was one of the most dominant decks that I've ever played. One of the most skill intensive decks, one of the most fun decks. It just happened to be overpowered. but damn, was that good Gwent right there.
Don't worry,
yeah,
Joe.
That was the same patch as the Skellige deck. That was first open beta patch, right?
No, that was right after the.
It was the same era. Yeah.
You had open beta with like Nilfgaard and Skellige. Then they nerfed Nilfgaard, so you had the Skellige dominant patch, and then they nerfed Skellige, but they forgot monsters, so you had monsters take over.
Because like the 3-month period after open beta was like the last time I remember this game being exceptional. Like the games were so good, and I think it was because like Northern Realms was unplayable. One of the factions was unplayable.
Northern Realms was really bad, yeah.
Yeah, Northern Realms was really bad.
But like the top 3 were so like just great. And obviously, like, you need to make the other 2 playable, but the gameplay that revolved around Nilfgaard monsters and Skellige was just so compelling that I kind of like I want that back. If I had the ability, I would just roll back Gwent to open beta and start over again. I would go from that patch and then start over, try and rebalance the game from that point.
Joe, I've got your mid-range Dagon on here as an honorable mention.
Okay, we got on there as an honorable mention. Yeah, man, that was just like the pinnacle of Gwent. I just want to play mid-range value grind fests. And God, it was so much fun trying to figure out when to pass, when not to pass, how can I eke value out of this. This was when Frightener was the best spy in the game because of your ability to weather it down, which you couldn't do with any of the other factions, really. Even though it still didn't have any of the draw options, it was like by far the best spy in the game. Ah, the good old days. And nothing beats flipping an old spear tip 3 times in round 3. Try it, guys, and you tell me if you can have more fun playing Gwent than that.
Yeah, it was fun when old spear tip like had text that encouraged like reward.
Well, now he strengthens all your ogroids, dude.
Yeah,
He's just good.
He does do that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Another honorable mention I have on here is the Midwinter Dwarves.
Yeah, that was a good one too. Turns out.
Very recent in our memories, but pretty egregious.
How many patches was like Mahakam Defender the best thing? Like, like Mahakam Defender was the core of like so many broken things, or I mean like just dwarves. Like,
yeah, dwarves have always been problematic. They've either been unplayable or completely overpowered.
Yeah.
Right now, for the first time, maybe they're like okay. But as you were saying earlier, like, even though things are balanced, and this is a sentiment I've echoed a lot on my stream recently, I think the game's incredibly balanced right now. I just think it's lacking the fun gameplay that really makes it super interesting at the moment. So balance certainly came with the price.
Yeah, a lot of mechanics have been stripped from the game in service of balance, and we have seen the result of that. It would just like roll it back. Just go back to closed beta. Just wipe the chalkboard, and then start from there. And like, you can do some easy things like make carryover not absurd and whatever, and get that in line, and then you're probably good. You're fine. Everyone liked that. You had 2 unplayable factions, but the game was dope. Whatever.
I'm seeing people in the chat are saying mill. That was never.
Oh, that actually.
If we ever do a top 10 most annoying decks to play against. That'll be number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
That would be number 1 most egregious design mistake.
Yeah. Just worst design, worst to play against.
Hey, I like Mill.
Spend a half hour. Yeah, we're banning you from the podcast. Goodbye, Shue.
I mean, there's some like there's the psychopaths that play like Lantern in Modern. Like you don't like it's like yeah, sure. I guess people enjoy that play pattern, but like you don't reward that behavior.
Oh man. But yeah, I hope you guys like the list. Like we said, there was a lot of crazy strong decks that we couldn't squeeze on here. Like, I mean, Armor Radovid, back when that was kind of insane, and, you know, Trollolo was growing the armor every turn.
And the crack deck that Truedawn sort of spot mentioned, that was on our short list of decks that we were mentioning.
The crack deck, yeah.
Back when I could play Croc, I, like, actually got into top 10 consistently. Because, like, decisions.
I remember you were killing it back then. The Skellige guy.
Back when gameplay mattered. It was great. I liked it.
Even like a Henselt promote, man, was like just kind of bananas, but
that would be number 2 on my most annoying decks of all time list. Like, hey, this game's about interaction. Let me turn a whole row of cards into things I can't interact with. This seems smart.
It's weird because like it didn't seem like that deck was egregious at the time. But, like, thinking back, because, like, so many other things were wildly busted. But, like, it's just, yeah, I make my row hexproof.
Yeah. Whole row. Oh, they all get bigger, too. It's cool, guys. Don't worry. Look the other way. Go yell at Consume.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard some sick things about when Roach used to come out of the graveyard and you can get like 20 of them. I played when Roach came out of the graveyard. There was some
Dude,
stuff
Roach used to come
before
out of the
Nilfgaard
graveyard.
was a
It got
faction.
veteran. Roach had veteran in Skellige and came out of the graveyard. It was so good.
Oh
Siri was
yeah.
that deck. Like, you didn't need to mulligan Siri because it was still like a 14 in round 3 because of Roach. It was so
Back
good.
when 14 mattered.
Yeah.
Man. Well, anyway, that was a fun little trip down memory lane. I hope you guys in the chat enjoyed that. I know we probably all enjoyed that a lot. Yeah, and like I said, you know, we've been kind of testing out these new segments. This is the second time we've done the list, and only the first time we've done that kind of play analysis. So please let us know, you know, what you guys think down in the comments and in the chat. We're really looking to, you know, make sure that we get these segments good and improved as possible. But anyway, I think we'll head back over to the other screen. We don't really have time for viewer questions, but I think we'll just
could take
do.
a couple, right? Let's take like 2.
All right, we can.
We could mainly deride how bad their most broken deck takes are, I guess.
We can do that. We can do that. I saw some
Let's see
people
if we get 'em
saying.
counting quick.
I saw some people saying the old Mardro like Siri Dash or like PFI lists. Like we said, we're doing since Nilfgaard was a faction because that's when most of us were playing back in the day. That's when most of us started.
So you got Mean himself says, do you guys want back faction passives? Me personally, I love the idea of them. And they added so much flavor to the game. They were insanely hard to balance around.
I have takes.
So, in my opinion, I don't think it's realistically doable. And if it is, it would have to be much more homogenized. Like, you can't have one faction be in charge of the coin toss every game, and another faction just have a 40-point carryover unit. Where, like, Skellige stuff gets a little better every round. I don't know. It would have to be done wildly differently, in my opinion.
So, the concept of faction passives is really important to the game in order to establish faction identity and make it so each faction played in a distinct way. The monster one and the Scoia'tael one were egregious because they directly converted into card advantage, which you obviously can't have. But like the reason I started playing this game, the reason I enjoyed Skellige is because the veteran passive made it so you were incentivized to play the game in a certain way that was atypical from the other factions. Like you wanted to like get into round 3 as soon as possible, like lose for value and figure out how to leverage that, and that led to like very interesting gameplay where like that no longer exists. And similarly with Nilfgaard, you could play greedier decks because you got to mulligan in between every round. Granted, I think that's good that every faction has that now, but like there were things that gave each faction a distinct identity that caused them to play differently and like have you build decks with them differently. And as that has constantly been eroded over time, we now see that most decks are kind of just various different piles of like point vomit nonsense. So I would love for like faction passives to like come back. Obviously, you need to reevaluate monsters and Scoia'taels, but
and Nilfgaards.
Yeah, and Nilfgaards not because it was bad, because it was too good. But like giving the factions like a distinct identity and making them play in a distinct way is something that has gotten lost over time, and they kind of need to recover if they want the game to be interesting.
Yeah, I think you can do that without necessarily having faction passives. Like, I remember when they took it away, they said, yeah, we're going to take it away from the faction as a whole, but we'll still kind of inject the cards with this flavor. So, like, you know, you had Akamaras, which were carryover for monsters, and, like, even on Skellige, they put on some veteran, you know, they put on veteran tags on certain cards where it was balanced and stuff. So, I would like to see them do that, but for some reason, they kind of even got rid of that in general. So, yeah, kind of sad. Overall, I wouldn't want the passives, but I would like to see them kind of inject those into the cards in certain places where it makes sense.
Yeah, injecting them into the important points was like a reasonable thing, like making it so Skellige doesn't have everything be veteran so it doesn't affect neutrals, but giving a lot of Skellige is veteran. That's like reasonable. You still maintain that gameplay pattern. Similarly with like Ekamar having resilience, it's carryover and like that's problematic for other reasons, but like it still maintains that pattern. You just like there's just not really anything that separates the factions right now, and you need to fix that in some way, and one way would be to do something akin to faction passives.
Yeah, I love it in theory. I just see it as a gigantic balance problem. Because that's something you literally have to evaluate every time you create any card ever. Just for anything ever. Even neutral cards, ever. I don't know. It seems very difficult to pull off. I do love it though, and for all the reasons Truedawn says, like I want the factions to feel more unique. I want them to feel different. I don't want them to all feel like, hey, I'm showing up with my points. How do you fucking like that? I don't think that's particularly.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't even balance, like, when you take faction passives and put it only on certain cards, you know, they put on, like, Axeman and Shield Maiden, like, you're not going to be able to balance when it's on every single card in the faction.
My hot take is that Veteran Shield Maiden was fine because there was a huge opportunity cost in trying to keep that card in your deck to round 3, and you also had to set it up by damaging something. But
okay, that card was egregious at the time. It was a 21-point bronze stand. Nothing. That was the most busting card in the game.
You had to have something to. They had to play something that you could damage back when golds were. You had to have something to damage, and you had to have the Shield Maiden in your hand without having drawn any other. Yeah, the upside was huge, but there was a huge amount of setup, and that's something that's missing from the game right now. Is there's nothing like that where you have to assume a risk and you get this payoff, and yeah, sometimes it doesn't work out, but when it does, you get the payoff. That's a play pattern that's good. You want that, and you can quibble about the power level. You can turn that down.
The power level.
Yeah. That game, having Veteran on that card to reward you feel I want to be greedy and keep this in my deck and use it as a finisher, and that could blow up in my face, but if it doesn't, it'll be dope. That's stuff that doesn't exist right now. And
it was also a 21-point bronze in a time where the average bronze value was 8 or 9 or something truly crazy, dude.
But again, there was a lot of setup. It's okay for a bronze to have that ceiling when there's a bunch of setup, and you could
I disagree with a bunch.
Yeah.
Our shields are our ramparts. I'm having flashbacks, dude. It was bad.
But again, you need that play pattern of not everywhere, but it needs to exist in a non-zero amount of asking people to assume risk for reward, and then get something rewarding if it works out. Is there a card in the game right now that you feel rewarded for playing? Is there some combo you execute where you feel good after doing so?
Can be.
Sure. Yeah. But
yeah, one out of every 100 games when it works.
But that's kind of shitty. There should be a bunch of those in the game. There should be a bunch of things where you have this cool moment where it's oh, that's awesome, I got to do this thing. And I can't think of any other than Combi.
Your premise is 100% on point. Your defensive Shield Maidens is nonsense, because that card was so beyond busted.
I think that you could adjust the rest. I would adjust the format around that card because it was so good. I would make it so that raw numbers value was egregious, because I agree that raw numbers value was egregious, but the card's play pattern was excellent.
Yeah, I agree with I agree with Truedawn though, where a lot of times you have this thing that's overpowered because of maybe point values or something, but instead of changing that or tweaking it a little bit, they just get rid of the whole mechanic, which I really don't like.
Work for it. And it was even harder to work. You couldn't just slap down a bear because then they could play a gold and blah 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 blah. Yes, all of that was really cool. The problem was the payoff was a 21 strength bronze to thin your deck by 2. Or what was it? If you subtract 6 from that, it's 15 in round 1. Come on, dude, that was.
I mean, yeah, but instead
a bit much.
Instead of taking a 1 point off the Shield Main and maybe 1 point off the damage they do, they say, okay, let's just make it a 3 rally.
You could have that card, obviously the numbers are hard to balance because they're all multiplied by 3, but you can you can make the numbers different and maintain the gameplay pattern of just for pretty much every example over the course of time. Instead of trying to adjust the numbers and maintain the gameplay pattern when the gameplay pattern was worth preserving, they just scrapped it and removed enjoyable things from the game, and that happened in Shield Maiden's case and in a bunch of other cases.
Yeah, Shield Maidens are a worthless card right now. They just are generic.
Literally don't have text. Actually, literally do not have text.
Yeah.
Is that going to do it for the day, guys?
Yeah, I think that's it. That one was kind of long, and we are running a bit over the time, but yeah, let's go ahead and do some shout-outs. Guys, where can everyone find you? Truedawn, why don't you go ahead and start?
My name is Truedawn. I stream on Twitch every weekday, 9 a.m. Eastern, until whenever. We stream a bunch of card games, Gwent, MTG Arena when that becomes streamable, whatever else. Eternal is probably going to be what we're doing on Monday. I also make videos for Topdeck. Check those out also every Thursday at around 10 o'clock. And follow me on Twitter is the best place to catch up with everything. So, and I think that's it. Joe, what's going on with you?
Best place to find me is on my Twitch. I start Monday through Friday, noon Eastern Standard Time. Usually go about 6 hours a day. So that's the best place to catch up with me. I am on Twitter at Joe Snow at Twitter. Come find me there, talk to me. Also, another Twitter you guys should be following. Check out the Wild Hunt Twitter. I can't confirm anything yet, guys, but I'm just saying that my inside sources, one of which is me, might be thinking there's another event coming up at some point. I don't know. Definitely worth the follow if you guys want to check that out. That'd be sweet.
Yeah, well, thank you guys all for watching. You can find me, twitch.tv/ShoePlays, Twitter at ShoePlays, and yeah, be sure to check out the show on YouTube if you've missed any part of it. We are there uploaded every Tuesday. And once again, thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next week.